My name is Bill, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm from Newport Beach, California. I want to particularly thank all of you for extending the warmth that you have to your visitors from California. Indeed, I could have closed my eyes earlier this evening after having watched your chairman of this rally, who is a male, dancing with the entertainment chairman, who is a male, underneath a basketball net which is covered with flowers, and would have assumed I was in the Saturday night Sunset Boulevard meeting. So I want you, there's really a lot more between Richfield and Los Angeles than just the mileage, and it's all in your favor. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm kind of a garden variety drunk, and I am particularly pleased that when I was new to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was exposed to a bunch of people who were service-oriented, as indeed you are, or you wouldn't be here tonight. And I came in with all of the misconceptions that newcomers come into AA with. Now, for some reason, when I walked into my first AA meeting, I was absolutely paranoid about the prospect of anybody breaking my anonymity. And I knew how my anonymity was going to be broken. I would meet one or more of you on the streets of Long Beach, California, following that first meeting, and you would speak to me. And then everybody would know. Because you were supposed to look like alcoholics, and the people on the street would automatically assume that if an alcoholic spoke to me, he had to have seen me in an AA meeting. I was stunned on the occasion of my first meeting to walk into that room in Long Beach, California. They were a group shockingly like you are tonight, and to find out for the first time that the alcoholics in the room were cleverly disguised to look like ordinary human beings. For those of you who are statistically oriented, I have been going to meetings now for some 17 years. I have gone through them on 3 continents, assorted islands. I have been to some international meetings that we have had, various state and local conventions, rallies, roundups, and what have you. I would guess conservatively that I have seen upwards of 250,000 recovering alcoholics. And I've been conducting a survey up through and including tonight's meeting, looking for people in AA who look like alcoholics. Thus far, I am happy to report, including tonight, that I have seen fewer than 10. All of whom turned out to be members of Al-Anon. There's a good reason for that if you think about it for a minute. Did you ever make book on the new couple walking in? Which one is the drunk? I am invariably wrong. I keep forgetting, you know, if you drank like I did, I was anesthetized for a goodly part of my life. There are parts of my story today that I still don't remember. But the poor non-alcoholic spouse has had to live through every rotten minute of it. You know, they are bound to accumulate mileage along the way. But luckily, when they get into Al-Anon, they get younger looking quicker than we do, and it all evens out. Now, I would say that whether my wife Joan and our friend Karen were here or not. There's one other thing I would like to say in the interests of AA Al-Anon harmony. To those of you who are Al-Anons of both sexes in the audience tonight, your drinking habits are every bit as peculiar to me as mine ever were to you. My wife is a good example. She is currently quaffing it down at the rate of about 1/5 every 2 years. 2 of those little bitty drinks they give you in those plastic cups on an airplane will take her all the way to London. At the worst of my drinking, if you offered me 2 plastic cups of booze and I didn't think you had a bottle to back it up, I would have said, to hell with it, let's not tease each other. But I'm a great believer in the Al-Anon program. It has contributed very substantially to my life. I have seen recoveries in Al-Anon that are fully as dramatic as anything I have ever seen in AA. You know, when you're around this program for a while and you become oriented toward the service end, toward the perpetuation, if you will, of Alcoholics Anonymous for those who are yet to come to it, I think everyone develops certain opinions about it. I am convinced personally that Alcoholics Anonymous is impervious to harm from the outside. Nobody is going to criticize us and hurt us. Indeed, if anybody raises even the slightest criticism about us in the public presses, we don't even have to respond. The medical fraternity or clergymen or other friends that we have on the outside will take on the critic for us. We're in a marvelous position, public relations-wise, with the rest of the world. If we are to encounter any difficulty in the perpetuation of Alcoholics Anonymous, it will come from within. And it will come at that point where you and I become apathetic as to how this fellowship is going to operate and where it's going to go. For this reason, I've never been one who's been worried whenever an area or a group or a district suddenly developed a tremendous area of controversy. It is the best way in the world to educate people about service when two of them disagree on what GSOs ought to be doing. In order to argue with each other intelligently, they get out the 12 concepts and they go into all kinds of other literature that they wouldn't even have known existed had it not been for that. And I'm a great believer in the existence of controversy. As you read AA Comes of Age, you come to the conclusion, I think, inescapably, that most of the really terrific things that Alcoholics Anonymous has done over the past 44 years have passed 51 to 49. Each side equally convinced that the other was totally wrong. And I think the things we need to be aware of are the things that are unanimously agreed upon. So I'm not worried about the guy who gets up in a meeting and says, I don't agree with anybody here. He may be saving us all. And if anybody here doesn't agree with what I have to say tonight, I would like to extend that same courtesy to you. You're only hurting yourself. Does it seem to you like our controversies in AA are a lot calmer now than they used to be? The resentments aren't quite as vicious as they were. When I was new, I was on one of those ad hoc committees that they have in every area periodically in order to save the program from something or other. And this was a terribly important one in Long Beach, and there were 25 of us, and we were going to do something that was absolutely vital to the continued existence of AA. For the life of me, I can't remember what it was. But it was terribly important, you know. And the chairman got sick and went into the hospital, and we passed a resolution at our first meeting, wishing him a happy recovery, by a vote of 14 to 10. You just don't see resentments like that anymore. Seriously, the 10 no's didn't think we had the power to pass the resolution was all, but it's an interesting thing to think about. One of the advantages, I think, of being around the program for a while is that the crises don't seem to be quite as deep as they do to the guy who's got 90 days. And for those of you who are relatively new to Alcoholics Anonymous, somewhere between your, I would say, your 30th hour of sobriety and your 300th day, you will come to the inescapable conclusion that all of us have had when we were in that same position, that you are here in the last waning hours of Alcoholics Anonymous, that the divisions are so severe we're about to blow up, you know. Read AA Comes of Age. It's the greatest source of solace in the world if you develop that opinion. It's kind of interesting, you know, the Psychiatric Association of the City of New York conducted a study of us at a time when we were fairly easy to find. There were only two large enclaves of sober members, one in New York, one in Akron, Ohio. And a group, I think Dr. Tebow had some connection with them. They did a survey on AAs who were recovering, and they came to the conclusion and published their studies that Alcoholics Anonymous could not survive over the long haul because our personalities were such that we would literally eat each other up. We were too vicious to live together. That was during the Second World War that they came to that conclusion. The Psychiatric Association of the City of New York disbanded in 1946. And we're still here. So I'm not really in great fear of Alcoholics Anonymous having any troubles as long as there are people like you who are participating in it. I think we're in better shape than we've ever been in before. And we'll continue to be that way so long as each of us devotes a certain amount of his time to worrying about the future of the program and the caliber of the other people who are involved in his particular area of it. I think it's a healthy thing. I wasn't thinking anything like that when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, however. If you're my kind of drunk and you develop a drinking problem, you don't go to AA first anyway. I mean, my kind of drunk is also a puppy, and therefore he goes to one of these socially acceptable methods of recovery. I went to a fancy psychiatrist at a posh Beverly Hills type address, and I lied to him, as a consequence of which he didn't help me, and I didn't pay him. And then I was exposed to the jails, the hospitals, and the sanitariums that are common to our kind of people. And only after I'd been through all of that was I reluctantly willing to admit that maybe one AA meeting would not cast a terrible power over the rest of my life. Now, I had one real advantage going for me when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was totally unaware of it. I had tried everything else, and I knew that nothing else would do it either. So I wasn't really expecting very much of you. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous with all of the misgivings that you can come with. And I heard a guy who had been in the same line of work I had been in. I had just spent 10 years in radio and television. The guy who spoke at my first meeting was still in that trade. We drank in the same way. There was some difference in our age, but not a great deal. I was 28 at the time. And yet at the end of the meeting, I looked around and I thought, boy, this is wonderful for them, but it won't work for me. And 90 days later, having gone to a meeting every night, I, for some reason that I still can't put a finger on, had come to the conclusion that I still didn't know whether this program would work. I didn't know anything about you. I didn't like what you had to say, and I wasn't thrilled by the book, but I wanted desperately to be like you, without knowing why. Somewhere along the way, you got to me, and it was nothing dramatic. It was nothing that I can recall. It was no single individual or single group or single sentence. It was just the exposure to the members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and life began to get good for me. But I was a slow learner. I came to that first meeting in June of 1961, but I was not one of those people who was destined to stay sober from my first meeting. I went back out and drank again in April of 1962. I stayed out for a total of 2 weeks. I came back at a time when I still had booze in the house, which I had never done before. And I came back to the same meetings I had gone to before. And I learned for the first time that if you think it is tough to come to Alcoholics Anonymous, it is tougher by a factor of 10 to come back. And if there's anybody here tonight who is coming back, don't let them give you that old bull that if you were ever sober in AA before and left and come back, it'll never be as good again. That's one of the biggest and most harmful myths in the program. The simple truth is that if you and I are not enjoying the all-time best sobriety we have ever had tonight, we have the tools to turn it into that, and we will never again be able to blame any past event or experience or individual for any unhappiness in our lives. So if you're coming back, stay. By all means, stay. It will get better than you can imagine, no matter how long you may have been here before. Nobody has to go out and be a bad example for me. The world is producing enough of them without our having to take them from the borderlines who are already here. So please stay. I came back and I went to a lot of the same meetings, and I thought I was in pretty good shape when I came to you, but everybody else must have thought I was terribly rummy. The only job I could get, I was a clerk in a department store for the first year I was around the program. And as is so often the case, when you get a little sobriety under you, you tend to get a little uppity, and I did. And at the end of that first year, I began to feel a little bit insecure about that work. Now, it was a terrific job. You know, when you sell T-shirts and sweat socks for the J.C. Penney Company, you don't have to take it home with you at night. I mean, they don't pay much, but you're not making management decisions in your off hours, so you've got plenty of time to go to meetings. I went to 8 to 10 meetings a week, you know, during my first year or so, I guess for the incredibly naive reason that nobody told me to stop. But I liked it. I really did. I liked everything about you. And so I began to get a little uneasy about my job, and this was the first time I was to discover something that has been true in my life ever since, and I don't know whether you have found it to be common in yours, but I pass it along for whatever it may be worth. Every good thing that has happened to me since I've been in AA has begun with a period of psychological pain. And at the end of that first year, I began to feel extremely uneasy about that job. And a friend of mine said, go out into the aerospace industry, they're hiring anybody. Which was a tremendous endorsement, but I went anyway. And I thought about it for, it seemed like weeks, you know. On the one hand, I had a terrible job, but I knew I could do it and nobody would fire me. And on the other hand, I might go out there and get this other job, quit the one I had, and then be fired from the new one because I couldn't handle it. You know, the kind of conflict back and forth. Finally, the pain of not doing it became too great. So I went out to the aerospace industry, and sure enough, they were hiring everybody. And I found that I'd fallen into one of the best things that ever happened to me. You know, I'd already been in the Navy, so I knew how to look busy without doing anything. That is of inestimable value in a lot of major corporations, the aerospace industry being foremost among them. And as a consequence, I stayed there for 7 years. But when I got about 3 years sober, I got antsy again. And I began to go through the periods of anxiety and depression, and the reason was that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. I was having a good time in the program, my personal life was fine, but I was about to make a change, career-wise. And I thought about it for a long time, and I talked to a lot of people. And I knew I was thinking about going back to school, and I knew I was going to have to make some changes in my schedule if I did, because I'd have to go to school at night. And I thought about it, and I decided that I would try it, and I decided that only after the pain of not trying it became too great. And so I went back and I made myself a promise that I would go to this school at night, but only if it didn't interfere with my AA program. And if I started getting bugged by school, I would quit and go back to meetings 7 nights a week. And I managed to psych myself up to enroll. Now, I'd never been much of a scholar before, but then again, I had never gone to school one day at a time before either. And by this time, you had been teaching me how to live a day at a time for about 3 years. And so I went back and I decided I wouldn't worry about the end of the semester or the end of the course or anything else, but I would go in with today's lesson today. And much to the shock of my wife and my sponsor and my friends, I not only passed the 4-year curriculum in that school, I did reasonably well in it. And I had gone back to law school, so I decided I should think about taking the bar exam. But again, I had this terrible psychic pain. Should I take the bar exam and risk starving out there with the new lawyers, or keep this job I had in the aerospace industry that wasn't very much fun, but it was steady? And of course, the pain of not taking the bar exam became too great, and I took it, and much to the shock of my wife and my sponsor and my friends, I passed. And I went into practice, and for the next 5.5 years in Orange County, California, I was a member of a reasonably prosperous law firm. And my economic status changed radically. And I found out for the first time that I am a creature of habit to such a degree that any change in my habits creates a degree of anxiety. And it doesn't matter whether the change is the best thing that ever happened to me or an absolute catastrophe. It's there. And the change requires that I get closer to the meetings. I became just as antsy about doing well financially as I had about doing poorly earlier. And so I was, by this time, around the program long enough that I got back into it more closely. Well, a number of things began to happen in October of 1975, which ultimately resulted in my being denied the practice of law in California. I'm no longer a member of the state bar. It began with one of my partners getting sick, and we had to dissolve the partnership. And at about the same time, I was feeling terribly sorry for myself. My partner came down with some serious physical problems just before my vacation in October of that year, and I thought it was quite cruel of him to time it that way. And my wife, we had this vacation planned in Hawaii. My wife, with this cold Al-Anon logic that occasionally permeates our homes, pointed out that if the problem was as severe as I was sure it was, that it would still be here when I got back from vacation, so why didn't we just go and have a nice time anyway? I'd never hit my wife, but I came awfully close on that occasion. We went to Hawaii. We had one of the best vacations we've ever had. I came back, and on the day I got back, I found out that one of the municipal courts in the county where I practiced was going to be taking on a trial commissioner. A trial commissioner in California courts does about the same things that a municipal court judge does. And the only difference is he's appointed by the court and serves at the pleasure of the judges rather than being appointed by the governor and being subject to election. I had put in an application because my partnership was being dissolved and I had the necessary time in. And a number of things occurred. I'm one of those people, incidentally, who lost jobs because of my drinking. So when I put in an application or a resume somewhere, I have to put that in. And I also put in a page about the fact that you and I had been carrying on like this for a few years. And they knew that I was a member of AA. And I was invited in for the first of the interviews. They had screened the list from over 100 down to 20 and decided to talk to those. And they invited me in. And we didn't talk about alcoholism or AA or anything remotely associated with it, and I knew why. They had already picked some guy that they liked, and they were just trying to get through without embarrassing me. About a week later, I got called back for a second interview, and I later found out we're now down to 2 people. And this time they talked about nothing but alcoholism and drug abuse and Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery. And later that day, I was notified by the presiding judge of that court that I was to receive the appointment, and so as of January of 1976, I became a commissioner in the West Orange County Municipal Court. The judges who did the selecting later told me that one of the advantages I had over the other candidate when it got right down to the end was my knowledge of alcoholism and recovery facilities in the county. So if you want to tell me what a tremendous handicap alcoholism is and how it's retarding you in your business, don't call me, I'll call you. I could have done that job comfortably for the rest of my life. I loved it dearly, but Governor Brown removed me from it a year later by appointing me to a regular judgeship in the North Orange County Municipal Court, which includes Disneyland and Anaheim Stadium and other areas where our kind of people tend to gather on occasion. And last year, the judges of my court, in a rash and precipitous move, elected me presiding judge of our court at a time when our voters decided to substantially reduce the property tax, and I suddenly became a cost accountant part-time, and it was one of the best years I ever had, being able to do this kind of thing. The judiciary is an interesting occupation for any member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I recommend it to you highly. If you have some knowledge of our problem and of our answers, you will find that the job takes on a dimension that many others don't. I have had some interesting games run on me during the time I have been on the bench, and I've had some rather rewarding experiences at the same time. I won't bother you with all of them. I'll mention just a couple that are unusual. I remember one fellow who came up one day. I was on the arraignment calendar, and we bring our prisoners up from the basement to arraign them if we've kept them in custody rather than releasing them on bail. One nice thing about our court system in California is you can readily identify the alcoholics from the social drinkers. The alcoholics are the judges, the police officers, the DAs, the defense lawyers. They come in, they do their business, and they leave. The social drinkers all wear T-shirts and blue denim pants, usually with Orange County Jail stenciled across them. And they are mortally offended if you suggest that they might be a member of that other group. In any event, they brought the group up on this particular morning, and this one fellow came up, and he didn't know that I'd had any exposure to the program, and he advised me, it was a plain drunk charge, a fairly simple one, that he had been rousted by the police while he was en route to an AA meeting. I looked at the police report just to check and see if his rights had been violated, and he had been not really rousted so much. He had been shaken by them because he had passed out under some bushes in one of the more heavily traveled parts of town. They thought he was dead for the first 5 minutes he was there. He told me then that he would have to get out of jail on that particular day because he'd made arrangements to get into a recovery house, and he told me which one it was, and they would only take him on that day. I've been a member of the board of that recovery house for a number of years. We have never had a rule that we only take people on Wednesdays. Then I happened to look a little deeper into his file, and I see that this fellow is on probation to us already. That another judge, a week or 10 days before, had sentenced him to 60 days in jail and suspended it on condition he not get picked up on an alcohol-related offense for at least 6 months. And here he is back in less than 2 weeks. And so he's got 60 days facing him. And he said, well, he can't do that. He wants to get back to Alcoholics Anonymous. He likes their slogan, easy does it. And I commended him highly for that and said that I hoped that he would, but that he was going to have to do 60 days, first things first. I might add that we made arrangements to, on the day he finished his 60th day, we had somebody there to pick him up. We got him to that recovery house. We got him in. It was not a Wednesday. And the last I heard, he was doing very well. I don't know about you, but when the chips are down, I go to small discussion groups when I really need help. I like all kinds of meetings, but when I hurt, I need to go to small groups, usually populated by people I've come to know over the years in the program who have a pretty good supply of common sense and good sobriety, and I think those terms are almost interchangeable at times. And there was one meeting in Huntington Beach, right next to where I live, that I go to with some regularity, and it's always good. And on a particular night some time ago, I went to it, and it was one of those meetings where the honesty was so thick you could strike a match on it, and everybody felt terrific at the end of it. There'd been maybe 20 of us there. And the group secretary got up when the meeting was over, and he said he'd be happy to sign court cards, and we said the Lord's Prayer, and a lady came over to me. She was in her 60s. She was very well groomed. She obviously had money, and she asked if I would sign her court card. And I said I'd be happy to, but I'm not the group secretary. And she said, no, sir, but you are the bastard who sentenced me here. Say, I want you to remember me when I come back. I did. She brought us back twice the number of meetings we had ordered her to go to. And I got to know her later. She has since celebrated her first birthday. And after I got to know her, I asked her why. She sent back twice the number of meetings. She said, because I resented the hell out of the fact that I liked the meetings, I liked the people, I liked everything about it, and you were ordering me to go. She said I would have gone to exactly the right number if I had hated it, but I didn't. So I figured the only way that I could show you that you couldn't order me to do this was to show you that I'd gone to twice as many meetings as you'd ordered me to go to. I wish a lot more newcomers had that kind of resentment going for them. You know? It's an interesting thing. I have one other thing to add, and then I'm going to get off the topic of what I do for a living. I have a nervous affliction. When I am referred to in AA meetings as Judge or Your Honor, or in England as my lord, I get very nervous and I will spill my coffee in your lap. And I will suddenly develop selective amnesia and be unable to remember what we were talking about and probably look as if I'm trying to get away from you. On the other hand, if you call me Phil and want to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous rather than your last court case, I'll be here until the last one of you leaves. So I would very much appreciate it. I realize that occasionally people do tend to refer to you by titles, but I think titles tend to kill people in Alcoholics Anonymous. We've doctored and judged and that kind of thing, people to the point of not letting them recover. And one of the great things about my exposure to AA was that I was a drunk first, and I'm still a drunk first. In any event, I have other jobs. I don't do that for a living alone. For 14 years, I was one of the public address announcers for the Angels, and I also filled in for the Dodgers and the Rams. And Jim and Jan Lombard, who've been very kind to us during the time we've been here, and I were talking about this. This is the first summer in the last 15 years that I haven't been able to, or been worried about setting up my summer schedule in terms of whether or not the ball club was home. And when I started working for the Angels, I was the only guy in the press box who belonged to AA. We now have 3 sports writers. We have one very well-known columnist who will definitely be one of us if his liver doesn't go first. We have half a dozen support personnel. It's getting to the point where we can hold a meeting in any press box in Southern California, and I predict within 2 years we will take over. We'll have a majority there. I don't know if you're familiar with press boxes, but in big league ballparks they have restaurants and bars behind them and everything is free. And when this one sports writer in particular and I are having dinner together at Dodger Stadium when we work together, we always have dinner and we talk about the meetings we've been to because he lives in West LA and we go to different meetings, although we know a lot of people in common. And we talk about the program in general, and we talk a little louder than we absolutely have to because with the exception of a drunk tank, I don't know of any place that has more newcomers to the acre than your average press box does. And we have a great time. And I really wish I had film of the way we are treated in the Dodger Stadium press box. We have service in that restaurant that's unlike any I have experienced anywhere in the world. And for a good reason. We're treated better than the owner of the Dodgers. For the obvious reason that the owner of the Dodgers, Walter O'Malley, is not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But the head press box waiter is. And not only does he take care of my friend and I, but when business is slow, he comes over and sits down and he tells us about the meetings he's been to and the speakers he's heard. And I wouldn't trade those guys for all of the brain surgeons and corporation presidents I used to drink with. I drank in the same sleazy bars you did, but I never drank with any ordinary people. I couldn't find any. I was one of those kind, if I walked into a bar that did not have a vascular surgeon for the evening, I might become one just to help them out. There was a place in New Orleans that I used to drink in. It was in the quarter, but away from the tourist area, that had, I think, my entire motto in 4 words behind the bar, with just a little sign that said, "Get drunk, be somebody." All I wanted to be was somebody other than me. You know, it's an interesting thing to see how your attitude changes. as you stay on this program for a while. I mentioned to you the deep care I had for my anonymity when I came to the program. And after a few years, I was in a position where I began to tell people first because I wanted them to know. And I do that now. It's more comfortable for me with people around me knowing that I belong to AA. For one thing, I don't consider it to be a stigmatic illness. I don't consider membership in Alcoholics Anonymous to be anything other than something in which I take a certain amount of pride. I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of what we have done, and I'm pleased to be a member. And the least I can do, if I have the occasion to do it, is to stand up for you. Indeed, you've spent 17 years standing up for me. Another reason I tell people is I don't have to think up all those funny stories about why I'm not drinking at parties. You know, like I have a stomach problem, or I finally decided to become a Mormon, or you know, any of the other dodges. Another good reason for telling people that you belong to Alcoholics Anonymous, I've never been offered a drink by anybody who knew that I had the disease of alcoholism. And it just obviates a lot of situations. And it's much easier for me to tell people. You know, there are some people who are relatively new here tonight. I had the pleasure of sitting in last night's meeting, which I don't mean to infer a claim that it wasn't spontaneous, but I thought it was about as poorly programmed as the way Hitler took Czechoslovakia. And I really enjoyed the speakers, and I had a very good time. But I know that there are some people here who are relatively new. And you know, I think it's extremely important that we remember some of the things we were told as newcomers and that we in turn pass on. I particularly feel that because if I can survive another 9 days without drinking, I'm going to have 17 years here. And that has absolutely no value at all to anybody except me and my wife. She doesn't believe it either, but I guess it should impress only the recipient. But I think that some of the things we were told in the early days bear repeating, one of which is, thank God we don't have to understand the Alcoholics Anonymous program before we work it. If only those who understood AA received its benefits, all of us would be dead of alcoholism long before we ever had the opportunity to expose ourselves to AA. If you be new or relatively new and you secretly think this is the biggest game that you've ever seen, try it anyway. If you be new or relatively new and you think we are all engaged in terrific mass hypnosis and that it's of no value at all, try it anyway. If you are new or relatively new, look at the guy who is celebrating his first birthday, and in that euphoric state that's somewhere between tears and maniacal laughter, you will realize that he was as skeptical as you were a year ago tonight, and at some point in that first year he found out that belief is not a condition of effectiveness. That if you try to work this program to the best of whatever ability you have, even though deep down inside you may not believe in it, it will still work for you. And nobody has ever worked all of the steps well or perfectly. We're still waiting for the first guy to turn out the program, you know, in an exemplary fashion. But I'll give you the one statistic that I think is more important than all others put together. Of all the people who got up this morning with a desire to stop drinking and who worked any part of any step of this program today, 100% are sober tonight. If you're a gambler, you can't beat those odds. So don't worry too much about the philosophical underpinnings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think I know less about them now than I did when I had 90 days. Concentrate on its effectiveness, not upon the rationale for it. It's a little bit like a story that I was telling Cliff Anderson here, an old Cardinal ball player, earlier today about a guy that I knew in my connection with the Angels, who had formerly been an infielder for the St. Louis Cardinals. I don't know whether this story is true, but I'll tell it to you. He came up to the Cardinals in the 50s during a time when they were on the road, and the traveling secretary assigned him to an outfielder whom I'll call Jones as his roommate. And the catcher with the team had played minor league ball with his rookie the year before, and he ran to the guy as soon as he saw him arrive in Philadelphia, and he said, "Who did you get for a roommate?" And the guy said, "Jones." He said, "Get somebody else. Jones is terrible." He said, "He snores all night. When he's not snoring, he talks in his sleep. You won't get any rest." He says, "You'll be back down in the minors in 2 weeks." The guy says, "It's too late. I already told Jones I'd room with him." Sure enough, the rookie comes out the next day, looks marvelously rested, goes 3 for 5, drives in 4 runs, has a bases-loaded triple, and the catcher, who'd been so worried about him, ran over and says, "See, you got your roommate changed." He says, "No." He says, "I spent the night with Jones." He said, "Did you sleep?" He said, "I slept beautifully." How did you do it? He said, well, when it came time to go to bed, I just went over and kissed him goodnight. He stayed up all night watching me. It might not have been logical, but it sure was effective. Remember that Alcoholics Anonymous does not have to pass your standard of logic, but it will pass anybody's standards for effectiveness. Let me close. I'm not going to take much more of your time, but let me close by talking just about a few of the things that I have come to believe about AA in the time I've been here. And as is the case with all members of AA, my opinions are subject to change on 24 hours' notice, but I pass them along as my current thinking. I am absolutely convinced that you and I are fortunate indeed to have qualified for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous. I am one of those nuts who believes that if I had been normal from day one, I wouldn't be anywhere near as well off as I am, by virtue of going through the hell of alcoholism, but by spending the last 17 years of recovery with you. I think that I have been exposed to a source of power that is greater than anything else I have ever seen. If you'd like to get, if you're new and would like to get just an inkling of the power of Alcoholics Anonymous, consider this. Go to the best psychiatrist you can find and ask him what kind of recovery he is experiencing with his compulsive behavior patterns, such as alcoholism. If he is really top drawer, he is helping 3 to 5% of his patients. For the last 44 years, Alcoholics Anonymous has been helping 75% of the compulsive behavior patterns called alcoholism that walk in that door and others like it. That's 15 times more effective. That's power. Put any label on it you like, and we all have one that suits us. But that power is there, and it comes into being every time you and I work these 12 seemingly simple principles one day at a time in our lives. Indeed, we notice it first as newcomers when we begin to apply this program toward our drinking problem. And many of us who had to drink to stay alive suddenly find that it is no longer necessary to drink. Now, if I understand the program correctly, I am not entitled to apply it only to my drinking problem. I am required to apply these principles in all of my affairs. So the same source of power, which has enabled me to live comfortably for almost 17 years now without drinking, is available to turn me into a better man in any area of my life where I apply these principles. It should make me better in my home, in my business, in my social, personal, professional relationships, anything I do. The other side of that coin is that if I have the tools necessary to bring this power into being, the tools that you and I call the 12 steps, then I can change my life beginning right now into anything I want it to be. So if I'm unhappy or unfulfilled or unsatisfied with any part of my life tonight, you have already given me what's necessary to change it into anything I want it to be. That's a hell of a lot more intoxicating than anything I ever got out of the bottle. By the same token, I am now aware that I cannot look at any unhappiness or any discomfort or any unfulfilled situation in my life and blame anybody else. They didn't cause it. I have the tools to correct it. And if I'm not correcting it, I must enjoy it. So I can't blame you or my past or anything that may have occurred for my present condition. All I know is that you and I are, according to the AA program, in sum tonight, what we've been thinking about up until now in accordance with this program. And what we're going to be tomorrow and the day after and the year after will in large part be determined by what you and I think about from this point forward. And that's a lot more power than I ever saw coming out of the distillery. It's impressive no end for me to realize that God doesn't have to give you and I one single additional thing in order for us to be happy right up until bedtime, if we choose to. But God has given us the ability to be happy or unhappy in accordance with our own free choice. And we have to make that selection. That's power, too. Maybe it was what I was looking for in this bottle and never found. But it certainly is here. Now, if you'd like that source of power working in your life, and if you'd be relatively new, you get it by applying these 12 simple principles one day at a time. There are other immense benefits to this program. I know less about it philosophically than I did as a newcomer, but I find that one of the joys of being sober for a few years in AA is that you no longer ask yourself those deep philosophical questions. Do you remember when you were 90 days sober and you kept wondering about what is the nature of serenity? You know, I got 17 years now, and I don't know, but I don't think it's hurting. What is the true source of power in Alcoholics Anonymous? Beats me. Have I hit bottom? I don't know, but 17 years is a pretty good start. That kind of thing, I think. There's a certain practicality that comes with experience, and I'm not putting down anybody who's new or anybody who's thinking in philosophical terms, but temper it with the realization that as you look around you in this room and every other like it, the promises we talked about last night are not being printed only in AA books. They are being lived out in this room and every other room like it where AAs are meeting together. This is the only recovery program in the world that won't just tell you what will happen. We'll show it to you in the lives of the people sitting at your table or the table next to you, tonight, tomorrow night, and as often as you come to these meetings. We have the world's best guarantee of success. We're going to show you everything you need to know. And we'll do it as you begin to apply these 12 simple principles. There is a certain excitement to being in AA. I go to meetings with considerable regularity for a number of reasons, not immediately connected with my emotional state. One of the reasons I go to a lot of meetings is you are the most interesting and exciting group of human beings I have ever met. By the same token, I must admit that many of the judges I know could cure my insomnia in no time at all. And I've thought about that. What is it that makes AA so exciting? Not just to each other, but to outsiders who see it. I believe it is our ability to live in the present. The people I know in Alcoholics Anonymous who are working this program well are the only people I've ever met who are not shackled by the past nor terrified of the future, but are living tonight for just tonight's own sake, who have now to live and know it. Everybody lives a day at a time. We seem to be the only group of people who are fully aware of that. And there is a certain basic excitement to you that comes from living in the present. There is a certain basic excitement to being around people who are young. And I've met fewer old people in Alcoholics Anonymous than I have met anywhere else. You learn very quickly in life, I think, that age has nothing to do with chronology. It's an attitude. There are people who are old at 25 and young at 90. I think the difference between the elderly and the youthful lies in the fact that the young are looking forward. Their aspirations are more important to them than their memories. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, everybody that I know who's working this program well is looking forward to what's coming and not worrying or doting on what happened in the past. And that makes you more excited. The knowledge that I think comes to us all, that for everybody who comes into Alcoholics Anonymous, regardless of your age or your circumstance or condition, you can absolutely rely on the fact that the best day of your life has not yet been lived. And every day you stay sober, it gets closer. Finally, I think there is a certain joy and freedom to being around people who have learned how to love freely and openly. And Alcoholics Anonymous members express this better than anybody I've ever met. We learn early in Alcoholics Anonymous that love is the most healing of the discoveries we have made in medicine in the 20th century, that it far outshines anything that came out of a test tube or off of bread mold or anything else. If we have demonstrated nothing else to the world, we have shown that if you love freely, openly, without reservation, that the miracles you can bring about are incredible. And Alcoholics Anonymous is the foremost of these. It's a great joy to be in the presence of people who love you, and who will love you no matter how you act or what you say or what happens to you. That, I think, is the source of the security that I see so many people out there looking for in material things. Material things present you with nothing that you can rely upon inside. But every member of Alcoholics Anonymous knows that if you get into trouble tonight or tomorrow or next month or next year, that these people love you, they care for you, they will do anything they can to help. And that's a source of security that I never had before I got here, and I've never missed a day of since I've been here. And I'm grateful to you for that. I guess in the last analysis, the ultimate miracle in Alcoholics Anonymous lies when we who are the original loners, who aren't going to have anything to do with anybody, come in here. And we're very secretive, and we're very clannish, and we don't want you to know anything about it. And we suddenly discover somewhere in that first year that the members of Alcoholics Anonymous love us, whether we like it or not. And it's a little terrifying at first. And then it becomes addictive. And all of a sudden, those of us who have been totally selfish in our entire lives up until this point find that you can only receive so much of this love before you begin to give a little of it back. And what a marvelous thing it is for anybody with that kind of ego to be able to look out
and a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and to honestly say for the first time in their lives, I love you, and I do.